The NBA's annual GM survey doesn't really mention the Pelicans a lot. So is the NBA sleeping on the team? I'll tell you why that could be a good thing for New Orleans, why I'm not concerned about the biggest concern, and a little trade talk in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans in NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Wednesday, the NBA's annual GM survey came out and it barely mentions New Orleans. Is that a good thing, bad thing? Why are people concerned about this team and not giving them a lot of love? We're going to break it all down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, plus a little bit of trade chatter for y'all here. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast coming to y'all like nobody else does, Monday through Friday, breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's dive into this one. The annual GM survey. So all GMs are sent a survey, 50 questions by the NBA. The rules are just, they're not allowed to vote for their own team. They can do basically everything else. To be fair with this survey, something for y'all to know, not every GM does this. They might delegate it to somebody else. But this gives you an idea of what people around the league, decision makers, are generally thinking. So we can get into some of this, but when I went through this today, one of the things that really jumped out at me is how little the Pelicans are mentioned in this, like barely at all. We'll get into the parts where they are, but there's just not a lot of love thrown their way, whether it's the Dejounte Murray trade, whether it's Zion Williamson, whether it's Brandon Ingram. This is both a good and bad thing that they're not mentioned. No one's really worried, I think, about the Brandon Ingram situation around him. That seems to be kind of a good thing if they don't feel that that is a combustible type of situation here that could derail New Orleans. And to be fair, in this survey, when they were looking at the Western Conference rankings, New Orleans was picked to finish 7th. It's pretty good. They're pretty close to the Memphis Grizzlies here. So that's not the worst place for the Pelicans to be in. Basically, like just on the cusp of being out of the NBA's play-in tournament. The rankings go OKC, Minnesota, Denver, Dallas. We kind of figure that. Phoenix, Memphis, New Orleans, Golden State. No Lakers, no Clippers, no... There's another team I'm forgetting about in that mix. No Kings, which I thought was kind of interesting. So they don't hate this team. This isn't like, oh, New Orleans sucks, it's going to be terrible. They're like, they're a playoff team, but they're not that good. So let's get into this a little bit more here, because my biggest takeaway from this is people don't have a good read on this team. That is my takeaway from the survey. People don't have a good read of who this Pelicans team is, what they're going to do, what they'll look like, what should the concerns be, and we'll get into some of those concerns and why I'm not concerned about said concerns in the next segment here. They just don't know what to make of this team right now. When you look at some of the, additions here for New Orleans, what was the most surprising move of the offseason? The trade of Dejounte Murray to the Pelicans doesn't rank in the top 5. It got other votes. Maybe that was because it was anticipated that Murray would be traded and that they were linked to him in the past here. But when you look at like what team most improved, they're not getting any votes in here. When you look at what is one player acquisition that will make the biggest impact, Dejounte Murray is not mentioned. What's the most underrated player acquisition? Alex Caruso won that one for going to the Oklahoma City Thunder, but nothing for the Pelicans and Dejounte Murray. I think people are sleeping on that move. I think people are sleeping on this move. They don't know how important that trade of Murray was for this team. That's an okay thing, by the way. GMs aren't running the Pelicans. They don't see him on a daily basis. They don't maybe have the best read of the team. National media, when they're not as big on that trade, don't cover the team on a day-to-day basis like I do or others do, and don't follow them on a day-to-day basis like you do. You know more about the Pelicans than a lot of just national media. That's kind of how it works. And I have a whole episode, a couple of episodes. The everydayers already know how important I think Murray is and why I don't think people realize just the locker room presence that he brings is going to be really important. Having a guy to organize the offense when they need that, when they're not going through Zion. And you even saw some of the Murray-Zion pick and rolls in that first preseason game just the other day. And then having him in crunch time, being able to close out games with someone who's done this regularly, I think is going to lead to the Pelicans having a lot more success than they did a year ago, or at least being a better team. Or maybe the biggest thing is reaching their full potential, because the New Orleans Pelicans did not do that last year. What this GM survey says is other GMs don't view the Murray trade as a needle mover. I disagree. I was somewhat skeptical. I think Trae Young would have been more of a needle mover in terms of the shooting. But when you get into the defensive side of the ball, the leadership, the intangibles, the stuff you can't really see and figure out till Murray gets here in New Orleans, I think this trade is going to be far more impactful than people think. I think Murray is going to be a difference maker here. And when we do this GM survey next season, a lot of it's reactive, like who was the best GM, right? Who made the best moves? Who knows how to upgrade the roster? You'll see a lot of love for David Griffin because I think this move is going to pan out in a really, really positive way. But there's not a ton of love for it, which is genuinely surprising to me when you look at some of the other things. Sure, maybe some moves were more surprising than Murray is, but when you look at who was the most underrated player acquisition, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to Orlando is not going to be as impactful as Dejounte Murray. Tyus Jones in Phoenix, sure. Kyle Anderson in Golden State, Josh Giddey in Chicago when he's not good, or Caleb Martin in Philly. Some of those things aren't the type of things that are going to make a massive impact. For the one player that will make the biggest impact, it went Paul George, Bridges, Karl-Anthony Towns, Caruso, DeMar DeRozan, and Hartenstein in OKC. I think Murray's going to be in that mix. Those are all pretty big, impactful moves. Don't get me wrong, but I do think Murray is going to end up being in that mix for those things when we kind of look back on this a year ago. The one area that there is a lot of love thrown at the Pelicans is on the defensive side of the ball, and it's none other than Herb Jones. He's tied for 5th as the best defensive player in the NBA. Really kind of tied for second. It goes Bam Adebayo, Gobert, Drew Holiday tied for first. Then Giannis, Anthony Davis, and Herb Jones tied for second, 5th here. The best perimeter defender is Drew Holiday, Alex Caruso, then Herb Jones. I think Herb Jones is better than Caruso, but that's a pretty good company for Herb Jones to be in, and I like him getting kind of all of that love. In terms of most versatile defender, Giannis, Anunoby, Wembanyama, Bam Adebayo, Drew Holiday, Jonathan Isaac, then Herb Jones. He's tied with Holiday, Isaac, it's Herb, and then Jaden McDaniels. That's really good company to be in. And to put a bow on this, when I said I don't think people know what to make of this team, where they just have no clue how to make sense of the New Orleans Pelicans because they don't follow them as closely as we do here. Which team's level of success is one of the questions. Which team's level of success this season is toughest to predict? Lakers are first. Tied for second is the Rockets and Pelicans. People have concerns about some of this, the things on this team. One of that is the center position and what are they going to do with it? The NBA Today was talking about this on their show yesterday. And I want to get into some of that here because I'm not as concerned about that as a lot of others are, and I'll explain why. Worth noting here, Zion Williamson got some votes for most athletic player, and then which player is the best pure shooter with Steph Curry and a runaway? But Trey Murphy also got some votes in there, which I thought was pretty cool. So that's your GM survey. What it says is people don't know this team. They're sleeping on this team a little bit because I'm pretty optimistic about what we're going to see from the Pelicans this coming year, especially around that Dejounte Murray acquisition. So coming up next, why I'm not concerned about the concerns about the Pelicans. That sounds weird. I'll explain. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us. But what about those fears that don't involve zombies and ghosts? Sometimes it's just, you got to face your fears, move past it, and then get on with your life. I was telling the story on the show the other day. I had something I had to do, and I've just been putting off because honestly, I just didn't want to deal with it. And then the stress just started piling up on me. It was literally keeping me up at night. I just kind of woke up and decided to handle it. But there's some things that aren't just a phone call, which is all that was. Sometimes it's more complex, more involved. Maybe it's keeping you up at night. Not facing your fears can sometimes be the scariest things, and it's going to hold you back. Therapy can help you figure out how to deal with those type of issues, how to progress and move forward and just feel better about your life, make your life better. Therapy isn't just for people who've experienced major trauma. Maybe you just need better coping skills, learn how to set boundaries, empower yourself to be the best version of you. Therapy can do all of that. What I love about BetterHelp is it's online. I don't have time to go to a doctor's office, sit, wait, drive there, drive back. I got to put out shows for y'all. So do it online. Skip the waiting room. Just hop on your phone, your computer, your tablet, whatever it is. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. You check out the YouTube page. There's more content that you don't just get on the audio side. We're putting up polls. We're having fun in the community section there. I can respond to your comments. I can see your comments. All of those things. We'll have bonus shorts and other things that are going to be up on there as well. It's going to be a fun time this year. We're going to have more content and everything for you, and I'm really excited about it. So if you're a new listener, you're in store for a great year. If you're a longtime listener, there's going to be new expanded stuff that's going to make you hopefully love Locked On Pelicans even more. Now for your second listen, the Locked On NBA podcast. We're breaking down the NBA GM survey on there. I'm on there on Wednesday, breaking it all down, looking at some of that. Who's the best player in the league? Who would you start a franchise with? Is the runaway answer Victor Wembanyama? Would it be someone else? Locked On NBA is making sense of the association and everything you want to know about it. So subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get into why people don't know how to read this Pelicans team. They don't know what to make of them. That GM survey question, I think, really says that of like what team's level of success is really tough here. And people just don't know with the Pelicans. So it's a couple of things going on with that. There's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of talent in New Orleans. Zion Williamson. Brandon Ingram's good. Does he fit? Question. Will he change? Question. But he's a good player. Dejounte Murray is good. CJ McCollum was elite from 3 last year. Herb Jones, as we just went over, is one of the best defenders in the NBA. You have one of the most impactful bench players in Jose Alvarado. Trey Murphy, everyone feels like is going to be a really special player in this league when he comes back healthy. There's a lot of talent here. Does it all fit? Does it all work? That's some of the question around it right now. And the center position is the biggest concern. And they were talking about this on NBA Today. One of their panelists, I'm forgetting everyone's name here, who said what, was like, yeah, this team has Zion. They're going to be good because of Zion. And I agree with that. And then Windhorst and Kendrick Perkins, I believe, we're talking a little bit about but is the roster balanced? Does it work? That's what people think are holding this team back, is a lack of balance. So here's what I think about that. I'm not concerned about it. I'm really not that concerned about the lack of balance around this team. I'm truthfully not. And part of the reason why is, look, your center, the center here in New Orleans, go with the starting lineup from yesterday. Dejounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, and Daniel Theis. Say Theis starts. Say you take Herb out and you put Ingram or something like, or CJ out and Ingram in, whatever it is. Say they start a center. Your center is what? He's your 5th best player on the court. You don't need to run your offense through your center. You don't need post-ups. You don't need shooting. You need them to be serviceable. Really as simple as that. Do some things well. Ideally, rebound would be good. But you don't need them to play like a vital role on your team. Switch on defense, defend a little bit. I'd say protect the rim, but they don't really have like a true rim protector that's going to be getting significant minutes, at least at the start. You don't need the center to do a ton. If your center needs to be the 3rd best guy on this team, then yeah, I'd be more concerned if the starting lineup was something like, Devonte Green, Jose Alvarado, Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram in a center. It's a weird lineup, but you get what I'm saying. Then yeah, I'd be more concerned because your center is going to need to do some work and play a more outsized role for you. But on the team as it's constructed right now, the center doesn't. It's your fifth starter. So it's not as big of a concern. Is it a minor concern? Maybe. Is it a concern that I feel would derail the team? No, probably not. So I think those concerns about like the center position are a little bit overblown. Orlando's a pretty big team. They held their own against them for the most part, and the rebounding was good. Might that be a problem? Sure. But if you commit to it, can you mitigate it somewhat? Maybe you're not going to be an elite defensive rebounding team, but can you overcome that in other ways? So maybe you're middle of the road when it comes to defensive rebounding, but are you an elite offense? Those two things balance each other out or maybe tilt in your favor a little bit. And it also forces the Pelicans to, put other teams on the back foot. One of the things that I like of like, how is this team going to be good or not is, teams might not know how to game plan for New Orleans, at least at the beginning of the year. Could they pick off a win or two that they wouldn't normally get because a team has no clue how to game plan for them? Sleep on this team. Don't know what to do with them. That's a good thing. We know how to defend other teams, but do teams know how to defend or game plan for the Pelicans? And the answer might be no, based off of the GM survey a little bit here. Then the other thing, and they talked about this on NBA Today, comes up, and that's terms of redundancy. A lot of wings, a lot of backcourt players. Do you have too much overlap there? Do you have too many guys that need the ball in their hands? Too many ball-dominant guys? The answer to that might be yes, but I'm not as concerned about that. That could be a bigger problem in this regular season. I think that that could be something, but it might not be either. If your concern is redundancy, that's kind of fixed if Brandon Ingram adjusts his shot profile and how he plays. Take more catch and shoot threes. Everyone take more catch and shoot threes, particularly around Zion Williamson. That works. That's a total, that fixes a lot of that, right? He doesn't need to be with the ball in his hands. He can work off ball. He can get it on cuts and attack the basket that way. There's ways to use these guys where this is far less of a concern. It's not like all of the mouths need to be fed. I do think Dejounte Murray, in terms of scoring per game, is going to take a step back, and that's fine, and he sounds fine with that. So when I hear these concerns about the team, maybe it'll be a problem, but overall, I feel pretty good about maybe not. Maybe it's going to be totally okay, and these guys work it all out. The early returns from training camp have been good. Preseason's good too. First preseason game, so there's a lot of things in flux. Maybe Orlando didn't play as they normally would have otherwise, and we didn't get to see a full Pelicans team, a full rotation. Maybe we'll learn more in Friday's game when it comes to all of that. So we'll see about all of this and what it might look like for the Pelicans here. But these are concerns. I agree with that, but I'm not overly concerned about either of these two things. Look, they might not win 49 games again, but I don't think it'll be because we look at this and you're like, oh my goodness, there's too much redundancy and no center. There's not enough balance here. It'll be because the West is tough and other teams are good, and it's as simple as that. Most teams in the West got better. You're going to have to compete with them. You might just lose more games because of it. Maybe everybody does. But while I think the center position is a concern, the early returns on Daniel Theis in that starting lineup and the way they used him were good. You can use him like that. He was good enough defensively, at least on the perimeter, not down low, but on the perimeter was fine. And that's kind of their game plan in the first place. So I think some of these concerns about this team is overblown, and people want to look at this and be like, oh, they're out of balance. Yeah, it's fine. Be out of balance. They're still good. That's the most important thing to me. You win with your top-end talent, not with balance. And with Zion looking like he does, oh boy, watch out, rest of the NBA. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think these concerns about the redundancy at positions, the lack of balance, the lack of a center is what's going to doom this team? Or is there just enough talent here that you'll be able to overcome it? Especially because I do think we're starting to see some actual growth from head coach Willie Green. Maybe we'll talk more about that in tomorrow's show, where we kind of focus on what we've seen from him thus far and the type of improvements we think he's going to make this year and why that's going to pay very good returns for the New Orleans Pelicans. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. So coming up next, let's switch gears. We are going to talk more about the center position because say it doesn't work out. and they want to try and upgrade that spot. Well, there was a move made yesterday. Someone was signed to an extension that impacts the team, I think, when it comes to all that and potential trade targets and partners. And I'm going to share a couple things with y'all. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, NBA fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can get in on it now for the Pelicans season. -6.5 of the Chicago Bulls on opening night. I think that line might change to be more as we get closer to it if the Pelicans continue to look pretty good in preseason here, and I think they do. When people realize the shape that Zion's in and how he's going to maybe take over the league this year, that's going to push him forward. You can even get really, really good Zion MVP odds right now. You can get Sixth Man of the Year for CJ McCollum. You can get Most Improved for Trey Murphy. Maybe even Jordan Hawkins after that performance. Maybe you're feeling good about the Saints and a QB change potentially that's going to happen. You can get in on their lines as well. And all you got to do is visit FanDuel.com to get started with that. First $5 bet, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com today, America's #1 sportsbook. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And for your second, become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday. A lot of the things we said in the lead up to that preseason game came true. Or I told you to look for certain things, and then those were actual things that happened in the game. Subscribe. Listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. We're going to keep you informed all season long. No yelling, no just like superfluous stuff, just Pelicans talk that you want to hear. And now for your second listen, Locked On Saints. I just mentioned the QB change. Spencer Rattler, anybody? Is he going to start? Is it going to be Jake Hayner? Locked On Saints with host Ross Jackson is going to make sense of everything black and gold for y'all. I'm going to be listening, especially this week, with what might be happening and some bigger changes to this team. How might it impact the future of Dennis Allen? Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints, going to break it all down, make them your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get into some news that broke after the Pelicans played the Orlando Magic in that noon game the other day. And that was that the Orlando Magic center, Wendell Carter Jr., has agreed to a 3-year, $59 million contract extension. First reported by Shams Charania of ESPN. Oh boy, is that weird to say. So essentially this means that Wendell Carter Jr., a trade target for New Orleans, can't be moved this year to the team. That was someone they've been linked to a lot, someone they had inquired a lot about. And I've long seen the Orlando Magic as a big trade partner for the New Orleans Pelicans. Honestly, I was wondering if they were going to maybe make some overtures towards CJ McCollum this offseason. They used their cap space in different ways. But you saw in that game against the Pelicans, they definitely need some more creation and a little bit more shooting. And CJ kind of makes a lot of sense as a guy that they could go and get that would have added that to the team. So they have too many centers. They have too many centers, but this takes a big one kind of out of the running. So could some of the other ones potentially be moved? And I'm not really sure that they will. They use Jonathan Isaac as a small ball 5, defensive 5 a lot. Paolo Banchero at 6'10" plays center a little bit for them. They have Goga Batadze as well. I think some of these guys are still potentially going to be traded, but maybe not. With this move, I think Orlando looks at a guy like Wendell Carter Jr. with an injury history, Jonathan Isaac with an injury history, and goes, we actually need like 4 or 5 guys at that position so that we have some redundancy, insurance there when it comes to all of that. So I think this move kind of takes them out of the running potentially for a trade with the Pelicans and for the Pelicans to kind of get their center coming in from Orlando. It made sense. They have, again, a lot of centers. That's kind of what we're looking at here for trade targets. But my read on the situation is no, that's not really what they're going to do. But maybe things change during the regular season. They get a little bit desperate and CJ McCollum starts looking like a really good option for the team. Potential for that to happen, something to keep an eye on for the future. So that starts to kind of, let's say it dries up as a trade target though. Cleveland is maybe going to open up later, but we're really not sure. You have Portland with Ayton and Robert Williams III. Ayton and his salary, I don't know how you really would make that work here in New Orleans unless CJ gets sent out. Robert Williams, too injured. Maybe if he proves it at the beginning of the year, you can make a move for him late. Maybe that unlocks you a la what the Dallas Mavericks did at the trade deadline last year. But the way I kind of see it right now is maybe these trade options are really starting to dry up for New Orleans right now. And maybe that means they're more likely to re-sign Brandon Ingram to an extension, to another deal, and just kind of keep this roster as it is for the most part, and maybe just try and duck the luxury tax at the trade deadline. Now, if they come out and look incredible, different story. We'll see. This is all kind of, TBD and could change a little bit here. But that's kind of the feeling I get. Seeing Wendell Carter Jr. sign that extension as a guy that makes a ton of sense for New Orleans was a little bit disappointing because I think you could have gotten a deal done there. But ultimately, it looks like that's probably not going to happen anymore. And some of these teams with these extra centers really could be just holding on to those guys for insurance. So if the Pelicans want to address the center position, I think it's the type of thing that maybe gets done next offseason, and they're going to roll with what they got. Daniel Theis was serviceable in those preseason minutes, but I didn't hate what we saw from him. I actually liked the way that they used him, and I think that's also a blueprint on what you could do with Trey Murphy in that starting lineup instead of someone like Daniel Theis. So overall, that can work, I think, for New Orleans. And as I said in the previous segment, I'm just less concerned about this than national media is, partially because I cover this team on a daily basis and I feel I know this team better than they do. And as someone who does national media, I'm about to go record Locked On NBA. I don't know everything about those other teams that we talk about. It's just kind of the nature of that job and that gig being national media. So I'm not overly concerned about it, truthfully. I feel pretty good about where this team is, where they're going to be in the Western Conference. It's going to be a slugfest out there, but I don't see the center position causing massive issues. Could be, we'll see. But overall, I feel pretty good about it. And as you see the centers starting to, the trade market drying up a little bit, not really looking like, there's a huge option for the New Orleans Pelicans, then I think it's one of those things where we better start liking this roster because it's likely going to be the roster that they have for a while. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Probably going to talk a little bit about Willie Green tomorrow. Maybe take some of your questions, put them in there as we get set for the next preseason game against Orlando on Friday. If you are in Florida and listening in harm's way from Hurricane Milton, please be safe. And as always, I'll see y'all next time.